Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of The Pulse, an instance to bring together experts from the industry to help you, the AEC community, to embrace the power of digital tools, to improve collaboration, to do more and better. I am David Basulto, architect and founder of ArchDaily, and I will be your host throughout the AEC series of The Pulse. In our first episode, we will talk about virtual spaces and the future of collaboration, an important aspect of our profession, together with an amazing group of industry experts. We are starting this series together with Cobus Botma from KPF. Cobus joined KPF in 2008 and became the Director of Applied Research in 2018. Cobus leads the global applied research efforts, focusing on computational and visual design, looking at the effect of construction and final occupancy of spaces. We're also here with Jan Bunge, partner and director of Squint Opera. Squint Opera is a digital creative studio with offices in London and New York. And for the last 3 years, Jan has been focused on building Spaceform, a virtual room for teams to design, review, and present projects in the built environment. Also today, we are with David McCall, who claims to be an ex-architect, but friend, you never escape from this. David is part of the Epic Games enterprise team, where he's supporting and developing innovation around the Unreal Engine and Twinmotion for the AEC industry. Welcome, guys.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you. I think we all want to be ex-architects, right? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm really keen to see how this progresses. And it's something very close to us, this virtual collaboration. So looking forward to this.
Thank you. I'm actually an ex-landscape architect.
Oh, you got this. You've got the scars as well, then.
Why not? And yeah, it's super exciting to be here, and I'm looking forward to discussing all this with you.
Thanks for joining, guys. It's great to sort of be surrounded by the great talent.
So welcome, everybody, and thank you for your time to discuss about collaboration, which we know is key for the AEC industry, as everything we do is with and for others. We need to understand the necessities of our client, about everybody who is involved in the project, and to translate that into something that fits their needs and aspirations. Our world is changing. I remember last year visiting one of the top firms in the US, where a friend of mine was sharing how the environment was getting competitive. They were downsizing. They were having to adapt because thanks to technology, smaller firms are taking on larger and larger projects, entering a space that used to be only for the big firms. And thanks to technology is that they know that you need to get more competitive. How, for example, collaborative documents and presentations are replacing travel or printing out project booklets, or how real-time rendering is replacing photorealistic representations of a building that usually used to take a lot of time and resources and a back and forth. So all these changes in technology are enabling us to have better, improved workflows that result in projects that are much more efficient to carry on. Why is collaboration a key part of the AEC industry? We will try to answer this relevant question today together with our guests. And I will start with you, Cobus. If you can tell us from the experience of working and pushing technology inside one of the world's largest AEC firms, please.
Sure. Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity. I think you hit a couple of points really spot on there. Collaboration design, especially the early stages of design, is critical. It's critical for exploring and developing. We run parallel analysis and analytics on site usually, but it's that getting together, that physical getting together of designers around a table that really pushes the design where it matters. So as you can see here, this is some of the work we've done in Holodeck, which is a product that NVIDIA was developing and is still developing. And it really shows a collaboration amongst multiple attendees from multiple of our offices. I think the great thing it shows here as well is that you can actually work with it through a normal VC environment through a screen, or actually be inside the space itself. And it's quite intuitive how we can move around and scale models and sketch on models. We've even taken this to a point where we've used this as a virtual photographic studio and actually pulled small scale models to various scale and photographed them inside the space. And that just shows the intuition level or the comfort level we have within VR spaces and collaboration in VR spaces. Now, KPF is a global firm, as you know. We have 8 offices across the world. And it's always important to be able to travel and get across, because we often often have designers in multi-offices that design on a single project, for example, say New York and London together. Now, we use communication tools, the normal VC kind of tools, the Zooms and the Teams and so forth. But very often it is more important for our designers to travel. Now, we've been looking at how to bridge that gap, even before COVID-19, partially because we want to be more sustainable. We want to reduce carbon. We want to reduce travel and so forth. But as you mentioned as well, we want to save time. It takes time to travel. We sometimes have to travel for 5-hour meetings, 12 hours one way and 12 hours back. And it's really an impact on how we work. So a few years back, as you can see, we've been looking at some collaborative VR applications and seeing how we can actually replace the physical togetherness with what I want to call a virtual togetherness. So instead of having to look through a screen at a co-designer, you'll be standing next to a co-designer no matter where they are. And the interesting part of that is, because we are so used to collaborative work, is that with COVID-19, it just become the norm. Instead of being locally in one office, we are now locally apart. So it doesn't actually matter where we are in the world anymore. So whether I speak to a colleague of mine in New York in a VR space or someone in London where I'm based, it's the same setup. And I think the point that you raised there about the globalization of design and how firms can quickly deploy and work across the world has really come to the forefront with some of these new virtual reality and collaborative processes.
And yes, as you mentioned, this is not something that is having to happen because of COVID that has forced us to work from home. It was coming from before, but now maybe we just have to do it, and it is accelerating and taking on the potential that these technologies have to make us work in a much more connected way.
Absolutely.
And Jan, how do you see the importance of collaboration in our industry as someone who has been helping other firms, studios, companies to take on the power of technology for this?
Squint Opera has tried to help companies in the built environment for the last 20 years to communicate very complex projects. But one of the key issues that was never resolved is the fact that even if I create an amazing film or an amazing image, I still have to imagine myself in this space to understand the impact. And we could just never do that until, recently. I mean, it's really just a couple of years ago, I feel that, the technology has reached a point where we can simulate those spaces to a degree where I can actually trick my body into feeling this spatial condition virtually. And in my opinion, that is the big game changer. This is what's going to change everything in the way we communicate, the way we present, the way we design, the way we sell in this industry, because that's a dream for every client, and we really feel that this is, in our case, very much driven, by the clients, where, from a client perspective, if I invest a lot of money into this new city extension or, building, having the ability to actually feel the spatial condition and feel the project and experience it before I pour any concrete, is great. The easiest way of understanding Spaceform is when you look at all the requirements that you have while you are preparing your presentation. It was super important for us to basically create a tool that allows you to focus your presentation in a very similar manner like you would actually do in a PowerPoint. In Spaceform, you do have the ability to switch from one slide to another. The only difference is that these slides are 3D environments that are designed to focus on a particular topic that you want to discuss in your presentation.
You're welcoming stakeholders, you're welcoming customers, you're welcoming people into the virtual environment, as a kind of introduction before they get to the space. I think there's a huge sort of disconnect in technology sometimes where someone comes into an architectural office or an engineering office and you sort of just throw them into an immersive environment. You put a headset on them and suddenly they're there. There's no context, there's no build up, there's no story. And what I really like about what you guys are doing is that you set the scene in this virtual space, which is essentially like an AEC sort of war room. It's like a meeting room. And from within there, once everyone is safe, once everyone's comfortable with the technology, you then welcome them into the next part, the project itself. And I think it allows a really good narrative to how Spaceform works. It's a great way of bridging that gap, which I think a lot of people might have struggled with before.
Yep.
We definitely come from, obviously, filmmaking. But it's the same, for us, it's the same problem over and over again. There's a very complex project which, bears a lot of very difficult decisions that have to be made by a very diverse group of stakeholders.
Yeah.
So 20 years ago, I would go as far to say that, Squint Opera really pioneered this idea of, a narrative-driven film in architecture. Before that, it was really predominantly just fly-throughs, and people were thrown into these projects, and there was not much context around it. But real-time is the same thing for us, where in the end, it all comes down to figuring out what are the core narratives, what is the essence of this project, what are the stories that people can actually understand. And what really helps is to have these narratives guide you, through the project. And as I said at the beginning, it's obviously very different stakeholders. And we developed the Spaceform presentation tool with a very clear case in mind, which is, we are servicing a lot of clients who have very large projects and very large project teams. And even though we started before COVID, it was all accelerated when it happened, because suddenly they had like 50 people on a Zoom call trying to do a weekly catch up and alignment meeting, where it's just very difficult to engage.
But it's a good point that, and David, you made as well. I think, we used to build these immersive environments, and it is you're all in or you're nothing, right? But I think we had a lot of, especially senior stakeholders that were the big decision makers that would not go into VR spaces. And I think the reason is because of the kind of you in the space, and you're the only one in the room in the space, and no one else is in the space, right? So everybody's looking at you. I think now it has changed, where you are going in a VR space in your own home, in privacy in many cases, but you are going there to meet other people, and that's a very different dynamic about it. And I just want to touch base on something else as well, because of course, for our stakeholders and our clients, it's very important to understand the design. But our designers are very, very well qualified on 3D and spatial design and conceptualizing and so forth. They think in 3D the whole time. We work in 3D applications, but I yet to see a designer that I put into a quick VR space, collaboratively or not, that have a complete different understanding of what they're actually designing. And it's like you said, Jan, is when they actually go into that space and start feeling, getting emotion about the space, that they actually do the important tweaks and the important adjustments before we have to go on site. And very, very important. Yeah, it's very, very good.
And because architecture, as you said, Jan, is like a movie. It is about the storytelling. Absolutely. But it's a storytelling through experiences. Yeah. And no matter how many drawings, sections, diagrams, or renders you show to someone, it is not the same kind of perception that they can get, unlike us who are trained to do this. So now this is opening definitely a complete new world to be able to collaborate with others who perhaps do not speak our lingo.
One point to this, because it's super important to me, this experience part. So, in my opinion, architects are experienced designers. And, and the reason why, is because at the end of the day, that's how we judge architecture and cities. And this is all about how we experience it. You go somewhere, you have an immediate feeling of how this space feels, and then you come back and you tell me this is a great street or this is a crappy lobby or whatever it is. But it's an experience that you have in this moment when you are in space, and that's why I feel like it's such a game changer for us to be able to experience the space virtually before it gets built, and not only for the clients but also for the designers.
Yep.
Well, remember as well, I mean, it's not just, I mean, we keep saying that, as architects, we are natural designers, but it's also about bringing in people where design is not it's not their role. I mean, if we look at bringing in engineering data and engineers into this, and even onto the construction process, understanding in our real-time environment how choices that we make are instantly visible and clear, I think really helps the process as well. If we're looking at engineering data in real time and bringing them into a space, clearly seeing, for example, where ducts are, where vents are, or even just where columns sit in a space, I think that kind of translation between, helping someone within architecture speak to someone within the engineering team, to help speak to someone on the construction team, a column which is maybe needed in a space, it opens up a great conversation and a great dialogue whenever you can stand in a room and go, wow, okay, that's quite interfering to like the feeling of the room or the feng shui. And it just allows that next level of conversation to happen, which is, it's again live, it's real time, and it's 3D, and it's there, which I think is another big value to it.
Sorry, the ability to simulate the environmental impacts and to for us to be able to visualize those, will also influence the way things get designed in the future.
Data is quite linear, right? It's quite black and white. We, for example, on many of our projects do a view analysis. So we shoot a bunch of rays from a certain window and we understand where it's clashing with geometry. Now, we don't differentiate from what the geometry is. And we've had a case where we've done a collaborative VR experience, and we've seen some of the windows are hitting geometry, so it's classified as a bad view. But we find out that in the virtual environment, that geometry it's hitting is actually vegetation and plants. And it's a very different point looking at vegetation and plants than looking at a concrete wall. And we've actually had a client, along with engineers and our architects, go through a project and walk window by window and actually mark it in VR and say, this is a good view, I'm happy with it. Over and above the analysis, of course. Of course, the analysis is important and critical, but it is a non-emotional, very linear method of analyzing our projects. I think that's the beauty about it, when you actually get into a project and can walk around and can understand that in some cases an obstruction is actually not a bad thing, where the analysis might tell you otherwise, or the same for that matter. So absolutely, being in that space is critical. And then again, bringing your fellow designers in first of all to make sure it's right, and then bringing in the engineers to make sure things fit, and then get the client in and then tell them the story through that.
Well, I mean, I think that just speaks to all the different sort of phases of collaboration and the different types of engagements that you can host in this. I mean, some people, I think there's this idea that, you can't show anything until it's final and polished, and there's a means to kind of get everything up to kind of a visual level, whenever actually starting from the beginning with like a mold or a sort of a block of clay, and then building that and introducing more people to it as you go through, still in a sequential step. But then at the end of the day, is everyone commenting on the same stuff long before you get to those critical submission dates. And I think that's what the evolution and the way that we're going is that process is getting easier. And that process is getting more refined, which is great to see.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the important thing of people understanding as well is that you don't need to show it all. You don't need to have all the detail. You just need to have what is needed to get the message across to the narrative or the design concept, right? Yeah. And then you can proceed. I mean, then you can continue. We don't do, necessarily VR collaborative models of full LOD 300 or 400 models. There's no point in that. We want the decisions early. We want the engagement and the emotion early, and then we develop. So.
Yeah.
This is a very big part of Spaceform as well, where we obviously design the presentations with our clients, focused on topics that we want to discuss in this meeting. And because I think the mistake that was done in the past too often was that people got too excited about what's possible, and then more is not always better.
And David, where do you see from your technology side that this is helping the AEC community in a technical aspect?
The idea that technology tells people what they should be doing or how they should be doing it, I don't think is ever been the approach of technology. I think showing the potentials of what it can do is really how it's helping the AEC and how it's helping the narrative of the story, how we design or how we present and how we storytell. And that's always evolving and it's always changing. I mean, if we even just look at the way we do things now versus the way we did it before, and also the difference in how one company will work over the way that another company is utilize that same technology in a completely different way. I think it allows this boundaryless effort into exploring and portraying ideas and communicating ideas in ways that before we never thought possible. I mean, if you spoke to maybe, engineers and architects 10 years ago, and said, soon you're going to be able to all walk around collaborative in this model and this amazing product called Spaceform, and you're all going to be able to like poke and prod at stuff and design together, then, that's ridiculous. But technology is allowing that to happen, that it's giving the endless possibility wings. And that's what I really like about it. And where it goes from that, it's really up to those who adopt the technology and those who use the technology.
And this convergence is also opening, I think, a lot. I think that many of the AC tools, have come from within the industry. But for me, it is very interesting that these kind of technologies are coming from the gaming side and creating a cross-pollination, because at the end, it's two industries that think about environments.
Yeah. I think what's really cool about this, the idea of merging game technology with the AEC, I think that is a great merging of two great tools. But I think the phrase which I think is most beneficial to the AEC, and we all keep alluding around it, is the real-time aspect. It doesn't have to be real-time rendered. It's more the real-time ready aspect of it. The fact that it's there now. It doesn't have to be the most photorealistic experience, which we know it can be, but it's just about being able to be working on something and instantaneously, real time now, then working on it somewhere else, or someone else then being able to see it. So, the days of, come over to my desk and everyone crowds around your desk and you're trying to like do stuff, but then someone's not synced the model and you run back and you resync. It's the ability that we can now do that, regardless of we're sitting next to each other, regardless of where you are, but it's there.
I mean, if you look at Unreal Engine or Twinmotion, for example, I refer to that as a big aggregator for us. They can render clusters and collections of geometry that we cannot render in our source applications where we actually generate it. And it's a very valid point. And it is there real time when you want it, when you need it, and how do you want to distribute it, which is that in itself, the actual file format of real-time collaboration is a very, very interesting.
And I think the ability, that Datasmith, that aggregation tool, which allows, which again is a huge part of the way that we all work, is that you want to be able to use the right tool for the right job.
Right.
And I think whenever you have a tool like Datasmith, instinctively out of the box built into the engine, it just means that you can continue working the way that you work, but then still have all these different participants.
Well, that's a very valid point. Yeah.
Kobus and Jenna, I want to ask you to put it maybe in a more concrete way to the audience that is watching this today, some examples on this kind of virtual collaboration and how it has affected in a positive way either a project inside KPF or some firm or project that you have been working with, Jan.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned before, there's a project we're working on in the US, and actually last year the client approached us and said, look, I want you guys to meet collaboratively, and they, we distribute headsets to the design teams, the engineering team that's in Florida, the client was down in Texas, and they started doing this collaborative meetings and markups. It's a big residential project on quite a difficult site, a sort of quite a hilly site. And this is one of the cases where I've mentioned where we run continual analytics on our environment and our projects as we do early design phases, where we actually done the analytics, but we've also done a virtual walkthrough of that. And that's probably one of the more applicable ones that I have seen, where we have really changed the outlook of certain aspects of design at the early stages. And again, showing it to them on a plan and a rendering is not the same as being inside and for them to actually be able to have their own control about where they're looking at. And these projects are moving forward at rapid speed because of this continuing engagement. So it's very valid, and we see it in many aspects.
At Squint, we do a lot of projects which are actually in the physical space, and often these are showrooms where our clients are presenting architectural projects, but we have a whole division which is focused on working with museums and galleries. And I think at the moment, every project that we're doing in the physical space, we start with building a virtual model of. And even if we're only producing content that goes on screens, it makes all the difference to actually experience this content, not on your computer screen, but in the actual dimension that it's going to be projected in the showroom.
David, just to add as well, we're on a project now, a transport project, where it is, we're talking about BIM execution plans. These booklets of how to do our BIM models. We've had to do a VR execution plan because VR is actually deliverable for the first time, and because it's a transport project, it is very important because it's always perceived from the agent, the pedestrian's point of view. And more so because of the way technologies were working, we actually did this in cave environments, so that we could have physical people around us that be immersed with a cave. So it doesn't necessarily have to go to the headset, and that's very important and very, very productive to do early stage design reviews, little phases of the project or so forth, to the complete overall review.
And I think that mix of the two and that way that the two are colliding as we take the best sort of ways of working from one and adapting it to the best attributes of another one, it is a good direction where I see things going. It's a good direction. I think we would all like a more kind of collaborative approach in the kind of whenever we look at realities.
Mm-hmm. But that's the beautiful thing about real time, right? I mean, you have one asset, and then we can put it into an AR app and see it on site. Or you can just look at it on your laptop, or immerse yourself in VR, or it's in a cave. It's
absolutely. Yeah, we work with some of our teams specifically that we distributed headset for the last couple of months. The teams are very close. They work long hours, and it's very intense to get the designs progress to the way we want to the standard we have, and so forth. And they meet daily on Zoom or Teams. We're talking about being physically together. As soon as they got virtually together, they picked up on each other's personalities immediately and start talking and reacting to each other as if they weren't a physical. And this is the beauty about the human, right? We just need that little trigger to build that rapport again, to generate the link again. Mm. And it's that understanding of the geometry or the model or the design or who you're actually speaking to virtually that really helps. And it helps getting the message across. It helps accelerating. It helps bonding the team, because that's how we really progress with our focus. So, and we've done that. We're looking at even now building the team corners, reproducing a part of the office virtually, so people can just go hang out there and bump into one of their teammates and have a chat, because it's much better and fun.
I remember a lot of this stuff was always seen, a good number of years ago was quite gimmicky, but it's amazing how we're now finding sort of real value in it. I mean, the idea of having an avatar to represent ourselves in a virtual world, people are like, oh, does it have to be an avatar? You're dressing it up in your clothes. It's like, but now actually, you want that virtual cue. You want that real-time cue of seeing your colleague walking around. And I think there's a huge thing in that. And I think that it helps the way that we work, and it helps communicate ideas, and it brings back a sense of, social cueing and sort of reactionary based work.
Absolutely.
And also to think that now I don't need an expert as we did before. To think that 10 years ago, maybe we had to feed the CAD drawings to a BIM expert to create the BIM model. Now that is something that we're all doing initially. And with this smart model, it is very easy to export to incorporate into new engines. David, what would you give as a tip for the people who maybe are really believing what we're saying and want to take on a first experience of this type?
There's lots of great resources on the marketplace. There's lots of great learning opportunities on the Epic Games Store. You know, we fully encourage you to use it and have a play around with it. And, you know, if you want to use it on a project, please get in touch and learn more. So download Twinmotion today off the website, and, you know, you can then go on and download Unreal and use it for free as well. You know, the technology's there, you know, the hardware is coming. I think the big shift is that the people are also in the right space. You know, I think that we got to give credit to the fact that, you know, we're all more open to this as being as a way of working, you know, which is why, you know, now that the technology is ready, it's there, you can go and download it. And there's this kind of split between what it is you want to do, you know, depending on how we want to collaborate. You know, there are great tools which are there to work with you no matter what you want to do, you know, whether it be team engagements or whether or not it be, you know, hosting to a stakeholder event or some form of conference. And, you know, I guess the best place I recommend people starting just to see some very quick results is Twinmotion. You know, I think we're all looking to kind of, we hear the term real-time ready or real-time rendering, you know, a lot, but to be able to see it, to be able to quickly actually take a model we're working on it and see it in an environment and start adding interactivity, you know, sharing it with someone, and then actually seeing how that works is just, it's the best place to start. Because, you know, as we were talking about earlier, once you see it, and once you see the benefits of where it can go, you know, your imagination runs wild. Your imagination wonders what else it can do and how else we can sort of push this tool and push this technology. And it's what's wondrous about the people within the AEC is that they're the creative types. And that's where I believe, you know, Unreal then comes into it. You know, whenever you have a tool where, you know, as Jan said, you know, it's one tool, but many experiences. It doesn't have to be just for VR. It could be for a phone. It could be for web browser. It could be for mixed reality. It could be desktop. And that's what the engine then provides. And, you know, be it a little bit more sort of a steeper learning curve, you know, there's lots of stuff fresh out of the box that is there to help people. You know, I said earlier on that Unreal, you know, one of the great things about it is aggregating data sources and allowing you to use the best tools for the job is one of the core components which is there to use. The other part is collaboration. You know, collaboration is built right in that fresh out of the box. You can use a template that's already set up that you can send. You can create an event where all your colleagues can join you in a virtual space. And you can start annotating and moving around together. And that is there whenever you start. And there's so many great resources that, you know, show you how to do that and to bring you into these spaces. And then where it goes, it's completely up to sort of who's using it.
I think the valid point as well, a very valid point about the ease of use. And then if you want to move forward, we take applications into Unreal Engine and then develop it within that high level of focus. But it is really to anybody's reach now to be able to do real-time VR applications with almost one click, or maybe 2 clicks, but not many clicks.
Yes, for sure that it will take a bit more than 2 clicks, but it is so easy, and Absolutely. It can really allow us to dedicate time to what is important, to take the decisions with the others, to collaborate, to have this divergent, creative kind of thinking. And Jan, what would be your tips for the first timers?
I mean, it's definitely an option to just go and try it out. And I agree, it's completely feasible. The next step up from that would be, you know, we have a lot of friends who are architects or engineers, and I think an easy way in is to hire a freelancer for a little bit and, you know, get them to train your 1 or 2 people of your staff. I completely agree. You know, we want to reduce friction and we don't want to introduce new tools all the time. But, you know, the truth is that it will take a little bit of time to get used to it. And, you know, you can do this on your own, or, you know, my recommendation would be to actually hire a freelancer for a couple of months.
I think it's a really, no, I completely agree. I think it's a really good option whenever you start exploring new spaces, whenever you start exploring new technologies, that if you want to have the cutting edge over, you know, a learning curve, or just, you know, accelerate your way of thinking, so you can even start thinking of the potential, you know, reaching out to these people, these experts are a great way of doing that. It is just, it's another approach, because, you know, I've always thought this, that, you can even engage better with, people like yourself, Jan, if you understand the technology. You're able to better engage in conversations of what it is that you want to achieve. And again, you might hate me for this, but maybe even help push you and make your job, accelerate the way that the product that you provide, because people are like, oh, I've managed to do this, can we try this? And you're like,
100%. I feel like, we spend a year, and that's maybe a good starting point for everybody. The way to start engaging with real time is really looking at your pipeline and your workflow. And what we do is we did a series of interviews where we would go through the whole workflow from the moment that you have an idea for a project to, we now stopped at, end of concept design. But, step by step, then you get 3 people to do this research, and then this happens, and then you do 3 options, and then you do 30 options, and you boil it down. And if you really go through this step by step, and on each point ask the question, I would suggest to ask 2 questions. Can this be automated? And the second question is, would this lend itself well to be done in real-time 3D? And then you prioritize and say, okay, what's the most important, for you? And when we did this exercise, our result in the end was that, the most important at the moment for our clients is to, be together in this virtual space and collaborate.
And I think, calling back to what was discussed at the very beginning, the McKinley curve, that was there, showing that if you can identify these right places, the time and effort that can go into something reduces. And that is really, that's the dream.
That's the whole point. But it's great because, in some way, this industry, I'm of the opinion that a lot of things in this industry are wrong, and they're not set up for collaboration. So if you look at how we contract, how we manage risk, how we incentivize people, there's no shared goals. There's no, there's something fundamentally that has to change in the industry. But if you just look at the tools that we have, these new tools are completely made for collaboration. So, and at least we can focus on that, because that's something we can actually change and move forward. But I completely believe that the moment that, you have gone through your workflow and you have identified the things that, could benefit from real time, then it's just, the next step is just to go and, do it.
And I just want to back up on the other one as well. For sure, I think getting a freelance designer is one of the ways to do it. One other way to do it, in addition to that, is give the tools to the young guys. They come out of university, they code in these applications, and they build in these applications, and they already have a take on it, and it rubs off to the older guys, like with the guys with the grey beard and so forth. So absolutely, use the young guys. Don't get the young guys to do the CAD drawings and so forth. Get them involved with technology. Let them show you how they want to design and how they want to move forward with it. So that's what we try and do as much as we can. So.
We are on the verge of a big change in our industry, and the possibilities are endless. But having the freedom to maybe think beyond where this technology can take us, David, what would you say that is the future of virtual collaboration?
So if we're looking at specifics, it would be that merge that we were talking about earlier on about, physical and virtual, ways that those two can integrate together. I refer to like a project done by obviously one of our partners, Mirza, who took the kind of the 3D printing, the physical 3D printing of a master plan as a kind of white blocks, and then used projectors, 12 laser projectors, to project real-time technology onto that 3D model. And it was the closest to holograms I've ever seen. And if that doesn't excite you whenever you walk in a room and want to engage and want to learn more, I'm not quite sure what will. But I think that's really where we're going with this, and where I see a lot of interest is, people are looking at, what does, the post-COVID recovery look like? What does the kind of collaboration look like going forward? Because it's opened up some great things, in collaboration, in the way that, it showed us that working virtually is possible, that it can happen. And there's still things, you know, in the physical that we do want to use as well. And I think together, that's really what we're looking. So, you know, development of, you know, HoloLens 2 and all these MR experiences, I think is a really great way that we can bring people into these virtual spaces and then develop, you know, ways that we can collaborate better together.
For you, Kobus, where is that future going to take us?
I think it's limitless, but I'll try and keep it short. Some of the things that we are very interested in and that we're trying to analyze and we're trying to determine how we can actually train models about is the neuroscience part of city design and spatial design. How do we as humans experience and what affects us to have that, for lack of a better name of it, have those Instagram moments in our heads of, you know, like I think Jan mentioned earlier, the way the light is falling down a street or reflect off a building or the quality of a lobby when you walk into it. How can we actually simulate that and reproduce not the design, but the actual emotion of those users? And that is through immersive design. That is getting people into those spaces, analyzing it, and also train probably machine learning models to help us assist in some of these analysis. I've mentioned before, I mean, immersive spaces really has an impact on you physically and emotionally. You know, going up into heights and standing on a high building while you're actually standing on the floor, it accelerates your heart rate. It gets you mentally active, and your body reacts to your mental side of things. And in a world where we have to build densification, you know, we have to make denser cities. People want to move into the cities, and now at a point, you know, where people say it might de-densify. Well, we say, well, it might not, because people don't want to go in public transport. You know, how do we make these spaces for people to enjoy their life and have a quality of life in these cities? And that we do with simulating it beforehand and actually experiencing it 100% beforehand before we actually go and plant a tree or build a building or put a facade up. So I'm very, very keen on that space.
And Jan, to close, what will be your prediction?
It's definitely not going to be boring. That's for sure. Yeah, there's so much happening in this space that is exciting. You know, I'm personally excited about a future in which we truly mix the physical and the virtual. And this is, you know, maybe starts in the workshop where we can blend 3D models which are virtual with models we have built with our hands. One thing that I'm particularly interested in, and where I think real-time can play a massive role, is this whole idea of architecture never being finished. I think, Kobus, you hinted towards that as well. And I would go a step further. I would say that, you know, in the future, we have to design architecture like we design software, as a constantly iterative process. And the reason for that is that things are constantly changing and users are changing, and, you know, everything is changing. The solution cannot be, the way we deal with office refit at the moment is that we rip out everything and put something new in. And, you know, this happens on a way too regular basis. So I feel, you know, real-time really gives us tools that allow us to change our design thinking and to really start embracing this idea of a constantly changing, constantly evolving design, even after it's built.
Yep. Agreed.
Thank you, Kobus. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, David. Not just for sharing your insights, your experience, but also to help us open a window to think about the future of collaboration and how we can do more with the available technology. That for me, it is very clear, it's not just technology, but also the willingness to use it and to be creative for that.